everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are doing my July wrap-up, and in the month of July I read a total of 11 books and had 1 DNF. So let's do some stats before we get into each individual book. So in terms of the star rating breakdowns, I read a total of 2 2.5 star books, 1 3-star book, 1 3.5 star book, 2 4-star books, 3 4.5 star books, and 2 5-star books, and then had that 1 DNF. For the genre breakdown, I read a total of 5 fantasy books, 3 sci-fi books, 1 thriller book, 1 nonfiction / memoir book, and 1 contemporary book. And then for the age breakdowns, I read a total of 1 middle grade book, 2 young adult books, and 8 adult books. So those are the stats. So now let's get into my individual thoughts on each book. So I did do one mini wrap-up this month where I went over the first 5 books that I've read already. So if you've already watched that mini wrap-up and you want to skip ahead to only see the books that I haven't already talked about, I will leave a timestamp right here for when I get to that point in the video. And then for those of you who just want to watch all of it, you haven't seen that mini wrap-up, or you just want to watch all my thoughts again, I will go ahead and get started with all of those. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is just the DNF, and that is Sing Unburied Sing by Jesmyn Ward. So this one is not a bad book by any means, and I think it was my mood at the time that I was trying to read this and the writing style. It's in first person present tense, which is probably my least favorite perspective. So this was completely my subjective taste and opinion on this and why I wasn't enjoying it. I had actually first started trying to listen to the audiobook for this one and noticed that I just wasn't following what was going on very well. And then I tried rereading it from the beginning again physically and also just couldn't follow it. The problem is there's not much plot. Like, this is not a very plot-driven novel where it's much more just focused on the characters and their thoughts and their inner monologues. And the way that the characters kind of think through things and the way you're reading from at least the reader's perspective is almost like you're reading from their train of thought. So a lot of times they will go off in tangents, thinking about things that aren't pertaining to the story at hand. So it gets very hard to follow the plot that's trying to be told and kind of the story that's trying to be told and follow this through. So this was totally my subjective opinion. I think that a lot of people are going to love this book, so I still do want to recommend it to folks. But this is much more literary fiction, much more character focused, it seemed like. It's something that I do want to try again in the future. Just for the time I was trying to read it and my mood that I was in, I just was not connecting to the story at all. It was really hard for me to follow where the story was going. So I figured, put it down for now, pick it up later when I'm more in the mood for this kind of novel, because I've heard amazing things from the people who have read this book, so it's definitely one that I want to give another try. All right, and now in chronological order, so the first book I read this month was Wicked Saints by Emily A. Duncan. This one I gave 2.5 stars, and I've actually already unhauled it, so I don't have it physically anymore. It was supposed to be a very dark and gritty YA fantasy, and unfortunately, it just didn't connect for me because of the characters. I just really didn't care much about the characters at all. There was this romance in this book that I just really didn't like or connect to whatsoever. I know a lot of people do really enjoy this book, so if this premise of like blood magic and this girl who can communicate with the gods sounds really interesting to you, I do recommend picking it up and giving it a try yourself. But for me, it just read like a very forgettable YA fantasy that really didn't do a lot to stand out from the crowd. I think the strongest parts of this novel were definitely the world building. It's a very Russian-inspired world that this is exploring. It kind of reminded me of the Grishaverse by Leigh Bardugo. I liked a lot of that, and the writing style itself, I thought it was well written. It's just, for me, the characters were really lacking, and the plot, I just didn't like the direction it went in. I didn't like the romance that was focused on. So yeah, I was really disappointed by this one. It's not for me this time. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if you're a fan of Wicked Saints. Still give it a try though if it sounds interesting to you. Next book I read was Wild Seed by Octavia Butler. This is a sci-fi novel that follows 2 different entities or powerful beings that are immortal. So one of them is thousands of years old, and he has the ability to remain immortal by occupying other people's bodies, but by doing so, he kills the current occupant of that body. The other immortal entity being in this world, who is a woman who can shapeshift, and she is immortal. She doesn't have to do anything to remain immortal. She doesn't have to kill or anything like that. She just lives forever. And she, at the beginning of this novel, is having a lot of trouble with her condition because she is outliving everyone she loves. She's outliving her children, she's outliving her partners, and Doro, the powerful being who is thousands of years old, finds her, approaches her, and gives her this idea of them being together and maybe producing children who would live forever as well, who would be immortal like she is, and she wouldn't continue to have to outlive her children. And this is really appealing to her because she's kind of at a loss at this point. And so they kind of team up, and she finds out that Doro's intentions are to essentially find these unique people who have these abilities and breed them so that they create even more powerful beings in the future. This explores a lot of themes of identity because of Anyanwu's, who is that shapeshifter being, her ability to shapeshift. And you also go through several different time periods. So you do several different time jumps where you're in different centuries with these characters, which was really, really interesting to see how the world changed and progressed around these characters and how they changed with it. I thought that this was a really, really strong sci-fi book. It was really unique, definitely unlike anything I've ever read. Octavia Butler's writing is stunning. I loved her writing style so much, where it wasn't overly flowery, but it wasn't just like standard, like to the point. It was kind of that happy medium where it was beautiful. There were these gorgeous descriptions, but then you also, it was easy to follow. It wasn't overly flowery in any way. So I loved her writing style. I'm so excited to continue on with this series because I believe this is more of a prequel book to the rest of the books in this series. I'm curious to see where it goes from here. The only issue I had with this one was I felt a little too removed from the characters. So I just didn't feel very invested in them personally. I was interested in seeing their lives and where they went, but in terms of like being emotionally invested in them, I just didn't really care all too much. I just, for some reason, felt removed, and I couldn't like pinpoint why. But that was my issue with it, so I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I really, really enjoyed it, and I highly recommend this book because of the writing style and such a unique premise and the themes it explored, and I will definitely be reading more Octavia Butler. Next book I read was The Vanishing Season by Dot Hutchison. This is the 4th book in the Collector series, which is a series of kind of individual stories, all contain the same set of characters and the same group of FBI agents as they try to solve these different cases. All of these stories are really, really heavy-hitting, very disturbing stories that get really dark, so I don't necessarily recommend this for everyone, but for me personally, I really enjoyed the first book in this series called The Butterfly Garden, and that's what made me want to continue on and read the rest of them. This one though, The Vanishing Season, was my second to least favorite in the quartet of these books. I thought that this particular case that the FBI agents in this book were trying to solve was interesting. It was about, it's called The Vanishing Season because these kids kept getting kidnapped, and it was always these girls that looked exactly like each other, and they always went missing kind of the same amount of years apart, but in different parts of the country. So you're trying to figure out who is kidnapping these girls and if they're all related. So I thought that the case that these FBI agents were trying to solve was really interesting. The problem was there wasn't really anything shocking or like a twist in this book. It was very much like solved by halfway through the book. You knew who the culprit was, and there was no kind of build up or tension to get there. It was just kind of stated, and then the rest of the book is focusing much more on the main character's relationship and personal life, which I just didn't care about personally. So again, I don't think this is like necessarily a bad book. It just didn't give me what I wanted, which was more of the FBI trying to crack the case, and rather it gave me much more of like the agent's personal life and her relationship troubles, and I just didn't really care that much. So I ended up giving this 2.5 stars. I was pretty bummed with this as being the last book in the series. I can see why Dot Hutchison did it this way, but I just wasn't personally a fan. I definitely think that The Butterfly Garden and then the third book in this series, which is The Summer Children, those are the strongest in my opinion, and then the second and fourth books in this series are the weakest. I do recommend that you check these out on your own if they sound really interesting to you. Next book I read was Anyone by Charles Sewell. So I read The Oracle Year by Charles Sewell and absolutely loved it. So I wanted to read his second book. Anyone follows the story of this scientist who figures out a way to implant someone else's consciousness into another body, and it explores the themes around how society would react to this type of technology, how we would use it in our everyday lives. I love those kinds of sci-fi stories. I think that's so fascinating to take a technological discovery and see how society would react to it. That's like just beyond the bounds of impossible. I think like some of the science behind this might be real. However, the execution was not the strongest on this one. I thought a lot of parts of it were very good. I thought the premise behind it was really, really fascinating. So some of this book I really enjoyed, but then other parts of it I wasn't a huge fan of. I thought the execution was odd because we kept flip-flopping back between timelines. So we would follow the scientist's perspective while she was trying to figure out the technology behind this discovery and kind of the immediate ramifications of that discovery. But then we would also jump forward in time and see, now that the technology has been mass produced, how is it being used in society and all of that. So I didn't think that that was totally necessary, jumping between timelines, because it did get a little bit confusing. And I think that we just followed too many perspectives. I would have much rather followed just the scientist's perspective throughout the whole book in a linear timeline. I think that would have been much, much better execution just for me personally. So I gave this book 3 stars. I thought, again, the premise behind it and some of the themes it explored were so fascinating, but I just wasn't the biggest fan of the execution, and I didn't really care about the characters because I just thought there were too many of them. The next book I read was Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. Jurassic Park was one of my absolute favorite movies growing up as a kid. I loved Jurassic Park. I would rewatch that T-Rex scene over and over and over again. It was my favorite as a kid. So I was so excited to finally pick up the book, and I have to say, it blew me away. Michael Crichton's writing style was what initially just made me absolutely fall in love with this book. It was so straightforward, to the point. He doesn't mess around at all. He gets right to the action, and I loved it. I love that he doesn't waste one word on anything unnecessary. Every single word matters, and it's so action-packed. It's non-stop. I loved it so much. So the writing style for me was so accessible. The other thing was the characters. The characters are so great in this book. I love Dr. Grant. I love Ian Malcolm. These characters are some of my favorites, and I might be biased because I've seen the movie and obviously love the movie so much, but man, this book, if you loved Jurassic Park, you are going to love this book because it just gives you even more of the fun, action-packed dinosaur scenes that you love from the movie. Even more is packed into this book. So I can't recommend this enough for Jurassic Park fans. If you are a fan of the movie, oh my God, I can't wait to hear what you think of this book, because hopefully you're like me and just love it to pieces. It's definitely one of my new favorites. I gave it 5 stars. The next book I read was Malice by John Gwynne. This was Shelf Space Book Club's July pick, and I am so happy this was the July pick because, you guys, I loved this book. Now I have to say, Malice definitely starts out confusing and might turn a couple readers off. I will say that for the first 100 to 200 pages, I was not a huge fan of this book. I was so confused. All the characters are thrown at you right away. It takes a long time to get oriented to this world, to who is who, and to all the different kingdoms and all this stuff. It's just thrown at you. But if you hang in there and you get past page 200, I think you might be hooked. If you're anything like me, if your tastes align with mine for reading, I think you're going to be hooked after page 200 because, my goodness, do the characters throw you for a loop. This is such a great book full of amazing characters. I really can't give a great summary because it's one of those like A Song of Ice and Fire where you're following a lot of different character perspectives and each character's perspective is doing something vastly different from the other, but then they all kind of come together and converge, and I love it. I would say that this does remind me a lot of A Song of Ice and Fire. If you are a Game of Thrones fan in any way, I think Malice may appeal to you because Malice doesn't concentrate a whole lot on magic system or history and lore. It concentrates much more on political ambitions and political alliances, and it has a prophecy, and while there is magic, it's very much hinted to in this book. I think it may play a bigger role in upcoming books, but for this book at least, it's a very small focus on the magic system and much more focus on characters and politics, and I loved it. I have to say, this isn't all politics. There's definitely a lot of action in here as well. In the final battle scene, I am not a visual reader. I have a really hard time visualizing fight scenes or magic in books, and you might be asking, why am I a fantasy reader then? I don't know. So I have to say, John Gwynne wrote his battle scenes and his use of magic in such a way where it was so easy for me to visualize. So huge props to John Gwynne and his writing style and how much I connected with it. The fact that I was able to so clearly picture what was going on at the end of this book and loved each and every character for various reasons. I think some characters you're gonna love at the beginning and hate at the end. It's one of those where you don't know who to trust, you don't know what's gonna happen. Lots of theories from here. I'm so excited to continue on with this series. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars just because it had a really rough beginning. I thought it was really hard to get into, but once I got into it, man, I could not put it down. I thought it was so good. And I even teared up a little bit. No spoilers, but it's really good. So if you haven't read Malice, I highly recommend. Can't wait for Valor. The next book I read was A Curso Dark and Lonely by Bridget Kemmerer. This is a YA fantasy Beauty and the Beast retelling about a girl who accidentally falls into a magical world that is parallel to her own and is taken kind of like as a prisoner to this cursed prince. So very much like Beauty and the Beast. But where this differs is the parallel world aspect. So you've got very much you're set in our world. It takes place in DC, and then you're transported to this magical fairy tale like world. I was hesitant going into this book because it was so hyped up from last year. Everyone was talking about this book, and I wanted to pick it up. I wanted to see what all the hype was about. I wanted to be in on the discussion, and I have to say, it totally lived up to the hype for me. I can see why so many people loved this book. First of all, Bridget Kemmerer's writing style is extremely accessible. It's easy to keep flipping the pages. I finished this in 2 days, and it's not a small book, and it's so easy to get through. And then the other thing is the characters in this book are so well done. Our main character is such a great character. She has a lot of humor. She's very strong-headed. She's really not perfect. She's flawed in many ways, but you love her even despite all those flaws. She is such an awesome character, and her dynamic with the prince is so great. I really enjoyed this. I can totally see why it was getting all the love last year. So this is a YA fantasy that for me restored my faith in YA fantasy. I've been having a lot of trouble finding YA fantasies that are very unique, stand out from the crowd this year, and this one for me finally did it. It finally stood out, and I really enjoyed it. So I can't recommend this one enough. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. There were a couple things wrong with like some of the relationship development was more of told to us rather than shown, but besides that, I really thought this was a near perfect book. So I'm so excited to read A Heart So Fierce and Broken. I know that it doesn't follow the same set of characters. I know that we get introduced to a new protagonist, so I'm kind of tempering my expectations just in case I don't love that main protagonist as much as I love the one in here. But I'm still excited regardless, especially since I just really enjoyed Bridget Kemmerer's writing style. The next book I read was The Blinding Knife by Brent Weeks. This is a sequel to The Black Prism, and I gave this book 4.5 stars. I had given The Black Prism 5 stars. I thought The Black Prism was excellent. I loved it so much. I loved all the characters, and The Blinding Knife I really, really enjoyed as well. I thought it was just a little bit weaker, and that's because of Gavin's storyline. So we pretty much pick up right where we left off from the first book, so I'm not going to go much into the summary, just in case you haven't read the first book. But for me, I think Kip's storyline was probably the most interesting in this book. I loved more focus on Andros Guile in this book. He is such an awesome character. He might be my new favorite character in this book now, and I loved the card games that him and Kip played with each other. That was so much fun to read about. And just little things like that, like a card game that is so well thought out, just shows what kind of world builder Brent Weeks is and how much care he puts into this world that he's creating. I love his world building style. I love the magic system in this book. I love the different ways that the magic system continues to be explored, even more so than the first book. So there were a lot of very, very high positives in this book, especially Kip's storyline. I really like the introduction of Tia's character. I'm really intrigued to see where she goes. I still feel like I don't know enough about her quite yet to be invested in her, but I'm very, very intrigued by her. So I'm excited to see where she goes in the future books. I will also say that while Liv is a frustrating character, I really, really like her perspective because I like seeing the other characters around her, their actions and their thoughts and their dialogue. I really like her perspective when we were in it. I think it was probably my favorite parts of the book were from her perspective. And I'm trying to be kind of vague with that because I don't want to give anything away just in case you want to read this series. Even though Liv maybe is a frustrating character that I'm like, I just want to shake you, I really enjoy where she's at right now because of other reasons, and you might know what I'm talking about if you've read this book. Then I have to say, Gavin's perspective was my favorite in the first book, and then in this book I really felt like Gavin's perspective slowed down. He was a lot more frustrating as a character in this book, and there's reasons why, which I won't get into, so I can definitely understand why his character was the way he was in this book, and there were some moments of brilliance with Gavin's character, but for the most part, he was my least favorite perspective to follow, which was so shocking to me because he was my favorite in the first book. So anyways, all this to say, I still am loving this series. I can't wait to see where it goes. And I think that there are so many different ways that this could go. I mean, I'm continuously surprised and shocked by all the twists and turns that this story continues to take. So count me in for the rest of the series. I can't wait. The next book I read was Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. So this was a nonfiction memoir. This is written in a way where Ta-Nehisi Coates, as the author, is writing a letter to his son about what it's like to be Black in America and be a Black man in America and how to navigate his life from that perspective. I thought this was really important. I highly recommend you read it if this is something that you are trying to learn more about and educate yourself on. The thing for me with this book, I always feel weird with memoirs rating someone's life. So I gave this 5 stars. The rating for me doesn't really matter for these types of books. The thing I will say with this one is the way it's written is very, very flowery. You can tell Ta-Nehisi Coates is brilliant. He is a genius with words. And at times, this book was almost hard for me to understand because I felt like it was almost too intelligent for me. And so I don't know how accessible this is going to be for everybody. But I think that the message in this book is strong enough that no matter if you understand every single thing that he's saying, you're still going to take a lot away from this book. It's a really short read, very easy to get through in a day. I've heard that the audiobook is excellent for this because the author himself narrates it. So I, unfortunately, am still on hold waiting for the audiobook, but I do want to listen to the audiobook again just to see how he tells his own story. So if you have access to the audiobook, I highly recommend it. I read this physically because I just haven't been able to get the audiobook yet. overall, I highly recommend this if you're looking to educate yourself more on race in America and that perspective, that this had a lot to add to the conversation and that you're going to take away a lot from this book, hopefully, like I did. Next book I read was Sunborn Rising, Beneath the Fall by Erin Safronoff. This was so kindly sent to me by the author in exchange for a review. So thank you so much, Erin, for sending me this. So Sunborn Rising follows this very, very unique, imaginative world where there are all these different creatures that you've never read about before and that are so unique to this world. And you're following a character named Bara, who is a listlespur who her father has passed away, and she is trying to discover his hidden journal and all of his old journal entries about his research into the old world and this mysterious plague that was supposedly taking over the world. This kind of starts her on a quest to discover these secrets and try to prove that her father was correct in all of his research. This is very much a story full of adventure, friendship, survival, and overall, I really enjoyed this one. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. This felt like it was more of a middle grade novel in terms of the tone and the age of the characters, but this is a novel that I think any age can really enjoy. Like, any novel, like, it doesn't matter if it's middle grade, young adult, or adult, any age can enjoy any of these stories. I thought where this book shined the most was absolutely the world building. This world felt very reminiscent of almost like Avatar by James Cameron, that movie. It felt very reminiscent of that world where there's all these like glowing lights and plants and beautiful scenery and all these wonderfully imaginative creatures that inhabit this world. And what's so unique and wonderful about this book in particular is that the book is filled with these full page colored illustrations throughout. So I'm going to show you guys just a couple because they're so stunning. Look at this. That is amazing. And filled. Every chapter, I think, has a full page color illustration to accompany it. Look at that world. Is that not so stunning? So that is definitely where this book shines and is so delightful to read because you're just immersed in this beautifully imaginative world. The writing style was also very accessible without being overly flowery, so I thought it was very easy to read and follow, while also being beautifully told. It didn't talk down to its reader in any way, even if it's aimed towards younger readers, so I thought it was really well done in that regard. The thing I will say is the characters themselves I didn't feel super connected to. I thought a lot of the character development that was done was kind of overshadowed by the world building that was taking place, so we didn't get a whole lot of scenes with the friend group kind of bonding and developing, and we didn't get a lot of scenes of like dialogue or anything like that. It was very much focused much more on the world and the creatures that these characters were interacting with and were coming upon through their adventures. But that being said, I still highly recommend this book to anyone who really loves imaginative world building and just appreciates the beauty of the art in this book and everything it has to offer. The soundtrack for this story is also so stunning. So I'm going to link all of that information down below, the soundtrack, where to get the book if you're interested. I do recommend this, especially if you're that younger reader or you're a parent who's looking for a great book for a younger reader, get them more inspired to read more fantasy. I think that this is a really great place to start if you're trying to inspire more love for the genre of fantasy. So that is Sunborn Rising by Erin Safronoff. Thank you so much again, Erin, for sending me this. Whew. We are almost done. Oh my god, this is the longest video. And then the last book we have is The Horse Dancer by Jojo Moyes. This was a contemporary book and I rated it 3.5 out of 5 stars. So this for me, I really like Jojo Moyes as an author. I've read, this is I think my 5th book by Jojo Moyes. I think my favorite so far is 1+1 and The Girl You Left Behind. But I've been wanting to read all of Jojo Moyes' books because I really like her writing style. follows these two different characters. One of them is a young girl who is 14 years old and lives with her grandfather. The rest of her family is either passed away or kind of out of the picture. So she lives with her grandfather, and he unfortunately has a stroke early on in this novel. And so she is kind of put into the foster care system. And then we get the other perspective from this woman who is a lawyer and hasn't been able to have children and is having a lot of trouble with her marriage. She is actually kind of on the verge of getting a divorce and moving out of her house and all of this stuff, and then kind of crosses paths with the girl who is put into foster care. And it's kind of their stories as they both kind of find their way in the world. Overall, like, this was a really sweet story. I liked how it ended, especially. I thought the ending was really well done, and there were moments that I really enjoyed this story. But overall, this was a 16-hour audiobook, and I don't think it needed to be that long. Like, I feel like we could have cut out 100 pages of this book and still had the same impact and story without a lot of the bloat. So for me, it just felt like this book dragged on through some of these scenes a little bit too long. And I think it would have done a lot better if it had kind of just been edited down quite a bit. It would have had more impact because you're not kind of slogging through a lot of these slower, more mundane parts of the book, if that makes sense. So overall, like, I enjoyed this. I thought it was cute and sweet, and I'm glad I read it. But I also was like, why are we still telling this story? Like, why is this so long? It was a 3.5. Again, there was nothing like bad about it. It just isn't going to be a new favorite or anything like that. Oh my God, that was such a long wrap up. So I have a question for you all then, since this wrap up is so long, and if you've made it this far, good for you. Do you like these really long wrap ups, or would you rather just see kind of more condensed thoughts and quick summaries of each book that I've read? Like, or even just like cut out the summaries. Like, what would you rather see? Like, if you like the long wrap-ups, awesome, let me know that. But if you don't and you would rather just kind of see my thoughts or my ratings or cut out the summaries or whatever it may be, leave those comments down below, leave that feedback, because I'm always trying to improve my wrap-ups. I've gotten like mixed messages on whether we like the quick thoughts or we don't, so just let me know what you would prefer. I want to put out the content that you guys want to see, and I don't love filming wrap-ups because they're so freaking long. But now let's get to our Booktuber shoutout. I love Booktuber shoutouts. So today's Booktuber shoutout is going to go to The Nerdy Narrative. Oh my goodness, Leslie at The Nerdy Narrative has such a fun personality. I love her sense of humor. I love how goofy and quirky she is in her videos. I just love her personality so much. She is an epic high fantasy reader. She is doing a read-through of the Dresden Files right now and loving it. She is a huge fan of the Faithful and the Fallen series. If you love those series and looking for more adult fantasy recommendations, please check out The Nerdy Narrative because she is such an awesome person. I love her channel so much and her content. So can't recommend it enough. Go check out The Nerdy Narrative. So that's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and I release new videos every Monday and Thursday. And until next time, bye!